In this video, we're going to go over 3 key elements for this upcoming winter that I feel is going to make this winter very unique and very cold. So let's start off with the first element, which is your La Nina. Now, we've been actually in a La Nina all the way back since September of 2020, and this is the latest update from the Climate Prediction Center for your October. You can see it highlighted in the blue shaded area. That is your La Nina. They not only have it continuing all the way through fall, but they've actually got a 75% chance that actually continues all the way through the winter months, and now really expecting to go possibly flipping into more of a neutral conditions, probably sometime in your March timeframe, extending into the spring of 2023. So if we take a look at the overall, all the model guidance, and this is where they came up with the forecast, they actually saw this and said, hey, all the model guidance, and most of them predominantly keep it into that moderate La Nina category and continue to remain in that La Nina category, not really going out of it probably until going neutral sometime in your March April timeframe of this upcoming spring of 2023. And another feature is your overall temperature anomalies. Now, this is the current look, so I'm not really expecting your typical type La Nina, or not anything like the last 2 La Ninas. This is going to be a very unique La Nina. We've already been highlighting this with these well below average temperature anomalies in the equatorial Pacific. But this one actually has a positive PDO, which is your Pacific Decadal Oscillation, with this warm blob up here into the North Pacific. Now, what makes this unique is the fact that it's going to be only the 3rd time in recorded history that we've been basically back-to-back-to-back La Ninas, what they call triple dip La Nina. Now, the last time we saw this, we'd have to go back 22 years, all the way back from 1999, 2000, and 2001. And then we'd have to actually go back to 1974, 75, and 76. So we've only saw this, 2 other times in recorded history. So makes this a rare La Nina. And we're going to be in a moderate La Nina stage. Now, what also makes this a rare upcoming winter is this second element, which is your Siberian snowpack. So we've been talking about the Siberian snowpack on this channel for the last couple of weeks, starting the step down process and the building stages. And this is the current snowpack for October 13th. It's almost 100% full up in Siberia. That's pretty unprecedented for this time of year so soon. In fact, if we go back the last 54 years of the current satellite era, we could actually see 2020 for the ending of September is 6th all time. 6 all time. So how does that compare to the last 2 La Ninas? Well, this time last year, back in September, we ended 31 on that list, 31 out of the 54 years. And we go back to 2020, we actually ended 52 at the end of September. So you can actually see this is well above what we've been the last 2 years. In fact, it's so well above. Look at number 1, guys, all the way back in 1977, 78. That stands out because it was actually one of the coldest winters of all time here into the United States, and not in the cold, and some of the snowiest too. So that was a really harsh and unprecedented winter, and it just really amplifies and it extends as we go into October. So typically what happens is when you have the beginning stages of a Siberian snowpack, well, I think the driving force is what's going to be unfolding as far as the teleconnections this year is going to be a positive PNA, which is your Pacific North American, and then a negative NAO. We're already seeing the beginning stages of that with some of that colder push anomalies into the United States and some of the coldest temperatures of the season. So primarily, you typically have a ridge that builds over the west and into the Pacific Northwest. And then you have the polar jet buckles, where it buckles into the central and eastern 2/3 of the US with that blocking feature, that negative NAO over Greenland. So if we look at that, look at some of the temperature anomalies going to unfold over the next week, we find ourselves with that positive P&A, right? You have that ridge over the west and into the Pacific Northwest. You have the blocking feature over Greenland that allows to pull and buckle that polar jet underneath and have that stretching event of the polar vortex. So we're starting to see the beginning stages of that with some snow flying in portions of Minnesota this morning, and some of the coldest temperatures of the season are going to be felt by the middle of next week for a good chunk of the country. And if we extend that, if we extend all the way in through Thanksgiving with that NAO continuing as a step down process, continuing to buckle, we find ourselves by Thanksgiving week with more ridging building over the top, allowing those colder anomalies to sink underneath, highlighting the central and eastern 2/3 of the US to having a pretty chilly week going into Thanksgiving. And if we highlight the temperatures of that, it has that blocking over the top, over portions up into Greenland, and then allows those cooler anomalies. So Thanksgiving week is already looking like a pretty cold air mass is going to be unfolding across heading into your Thanksgiving week. So if we go beyond that, we start to look towards your winter, we look at some of the teleconnections, which is your NAO, right? So we've been highlighting that negative NAO, which is, I think, it's going to be a predominantly driving force. You can actually see it's a step down process now. So we're just at the beginning stages of it, where it starts to turn negative, keeping that polar jet, and starts to buckle and starts to pull some of those colder anomalies down into the United States. And that actually continues to remain negative through December and through January. So, and that just combines with the Arctic oscillation as well. So we find that oscillation going negative as well. So we have the positive P&A, the ridge predominantly over the west and northwest, while much of the central and eastern 2/3 are going to be a colder push with the overall teleconnections with the NAO and the AO going negative going into the heart of winter. Now, a third element, which is an important element, is going to be going back all the way in January of this year when that underwater volcano erupted, sending off the South Pacific Ocean, sending an unprecedented amount of water directly up into the stratosphere, folks. Now, that water vapor might stay there for years, likely affecting the Earth's climate pattern. Scientists say the massive amount of water that is roughly about 10% of what's normally the amount of found in the stratosphere, that equals more than 58,000 Olympic-sized swimming pools. They've never seen anything like it. So the combination of the triple dip La Niña, the elevated snowpack, the early snowpack, the Siberian snowpack, and then combined with all the extra water vapor, what does that look like, right? So if we go up in the stratosphere and we look at some of the water vapor going back for the last 18 years, this is off the charts, folks. That is the extra 10% built up into the stratosphere. It's not even on the chart, right? This is all that deep green. Now, typically what happens is when you have that extra moisture, now that we're going into the winter months, that allows the mid-latitudes to start to cool. So when they cool, they allow the polar jet, the polar vortex, to start to wave and start to buckle. So when it's strong, it's basically a perfect circle. It keeps all the Arctic air up in the Arctic. But when it starts to buckle, when it starts to become wavy, it starts to pull that polar jet further south, and that's what's going to happen. So we're already seeing the beginning stages of that, right? With that stretching event that's coming into the United States this week. But I think this is going to be a continuing push. Now, we saw 7 disruptions last year. I think we're going to get more, if not a lot more disruptions, if not splits, coming into this winter with the combination of all 3 elements. They're going to be combined together for this upcoming winter. Now, what does that look like? So if we take a look at the polar vortex, and as we have that blocking over the top, that allows that ridge to set up with that positive P&A out west and out in the Pacific Northwest, allows the polar jet to buckle. When it buckles, it pulls down that Arctic air into the central and eastern 2/3 of the US. So I feel like that's going to be the predominant force. Now, if we go back to that Siberian snowpack, right? So if we look at the last satellite era history, the last 54 years, taking just the snowpack alone of where we are now with that Siberian snowpack, if we look at some of the anomalies, we look at the top 5, right? Top 5 would be, because we're number 6 right now. So 2015, 2017, 2003, we have that harsh winter of 1977 and 1969. So if we combine all that together and come up with the 500 millibar and the height anomalies, we look like this. The ridging over the top with the negative NAO. We got the buckling of the jet stream underneath. We got the coldest push anomalies into the central and eastern 2/3 of the US, mainly focused on the upper Midwest, the upper Great Lakes, the Ohio Valley, pushing east and then modifying as you head further south into the central and eastern 2/3 of the US. If we take a look at the overall temperatures for your winter months for December, January, and February, highlighting those 5, top 5 Siberian snowpack winters, we come up with this, right? We have the main push over the upper Great Lakes, upper Midwest, through the Ohio Valley, shifting east, still cold into the central and eastern 2/3, but not as cold, not as harsh further north. I feel with the atmospheric river coming back into the Pacific Northwest, that alone is going to be more of a chillier rain for you guys, with much of the West, California, much of the desert Southwest being above average temperatures. So if we take a look at the overall precipitation, I feel this is not going to be like a quote unquote typical La Nina, but we are going to be getting some of those below average precipitation for those 90 days of winter, predominantly in much of the central and Southern California, much of the desert Southwest, much of Texas, I feel is going to be below average precipitation, and much of just along the coast into the deep South, especially into Florida. Now, it doesn't mean you're not going to get cold down here. It doesn't mean you're not going to get even ice or even some snow. I mean, typically, just to give you an example, in Texas, say in Dallas, they typically average about 8 inches of precipitation over the winter months. Well, just last year, if you recall, they only had 2 inches, right? But you still got cold. You still had some ice around, and it still had some snow. So just because if you're below average precipitation doesn't mean it can't snow. It just means that overall it's going to be, below average as far as those 90 days of precipitation. But further north, I'm expecting above average precipitation, where I feel where the atmospheric river comes back into play for the Pacific Northwest, and with the polar jet dipping down, most of this is going to be in the form of snow, with the harshest winter, I think, elongating over the Dakotas, over the upper Midwest, especially the upper Great Lakes, into the Ohio Valley, and shifting into the Mid-Atlantic, into the Northeast. If we take a look at January, heading into January, we start already again going into the heart of winter. We see the blocking over the top with the negative NAO. We allow the polar jet to come underneath. There's the positive PNA out west, allows the polar jet to dip, sending in that Arctic air, the coldest push into the central and eastern 2/3 of the US. Now, another element of these stratospheric warming events. So not only do I feel that we're going to have polar vortex stretchings, disruptions, splits, but we're also going to have that stratospheric warming event, if not 2 of those this year. We saw that back in January 28th, 29th of 2019, where we had that stratospheric warming event. And I think this is where we're going to be seeing the most harshest winter coming up for much of the Dakotas and much of the upper Midwest and upper Great Lakes. This was that event, so I feel like, what's coming for this winter, it has the possibility of some of these temperatures dropping as low as 40 below zero up here, and these are wind chills of the actual event that took place with the last stratospheric warming event, approaching 50 and 60 below zero wind chills. I feel some of that could be of the same magnitude, and we get a second one as well. And recall the other one was back in 2020 when it really hit Texas. So I feel like we're going to have 2 stratospheric warming events this year, combined with multiple polar vortex disruption. So if we take a look at the overall January temperature anomalies highlighting that Greenland block, we find it blocking over the top. We find the main push, right? The main push going into the heart of winter, into the upper Midwest, into the upper Great Lakes, shifting off into the, up Ohio Valley, into the Northeast, and then modifying, still cold, into parts of the Southeast and much of Texas, and then just cool shots as you get towards into Florida, with much of this area remaining above average temperature anomalies. So if we extend the view, so I talked about the negative NAO, so we're beginning the beginning aspects of the negative NAO. I think it continues as a step down process. As we get into November, we're really going to be starting to feel the effects with that blocking feature over the top, setting up the colder air underneath. So it looks to remain negative, and that's going to be the predominant theme going forward into your winter months for November, December, January. You can see it negative even into February, going into March, even back into April. It remains neutral, if not negative, for those months. So if we take a look at the overall forecast, combining all those elements, this is what I came up with the atmospheric river continue to remain in full effect. So with the rain alone, I think you're going to be overall chillier and rainier than normal, with much of the west out here into the parts of California. Much of the desert Southwest is going to be drier and warmer. Got the heavier mountain snows, but the main push of the Arctic air, the most harshest of winters, are gonna be here into the upper Midwest, going into the upper Great Lakes, and then going into parts of the Ohio Valley, and then modifying as you extend into the Northeast, into New England, with a cold and snowy winter. But your most frigid air, your most snowiest anomalies are going to be really setting up in this purple shaded area, and then modifying as it pushes south. So you'll still get colder and snowier blasts through Kansas, through parts of Oklahoma, and then kind of an icy, kind of wet snow at times, and a good chunk of parts of the Kentucky area, parts of the Southeast. And then you'll have your cooler shots as you extend into Florida, but overall, it'll be modifying by the time it gets to you. And then you'll be cold at times with these cold shots for much of the deep south of the Rio Grande Valley, parts of Houston, parts of South Texas, while to the north of there, you'll be in your colder shots, and then more snow, as far as above average snows at times, and with the heavier snow is really elongating over the mountain region. So hey, I appreciate you guys watching. Do like this video, definitely leave your comments below, and don't forget to subscribe to my channel. Hit a update where I protect you before and after the storm.